the woods, and we cut down these trees. It was sort of like a pine forest, and the trees are so dense in there that they're just like grass almost, they're that, and they never grow very large. Well, we were cutting down poles that run around 8 inches in diameter, and they were just as long as we could get them, and there would be 4 guys that were carrying these poles to make a gun emplacement. Well, that's against Geneva officials, Geneva rules, whatever they call them. And you're not supposed to aid in any war effort. So they paid us. And I still have the money in my scrapbook. 1 mark and 10 pfennigs. It would be sort of like $1.10. And so to get around it, you see, that we had worked on a war effort thing, they paid us. And then the other time that I was working on a set of railroad tracks way up north between Rostock, Germany, which is right on the North Sea, and Stettin, or Stettin, however they pronounce it, is right on the border of Poland. And I worked on a single set of railroad tracks, the coldest winter they'd had in 40 years, and that was the winter of 44. And it was never bombed once. So us guys figured that it was pretty darn well controlled by the underground, that they knew who was there. And then and this was the only, you might say, injury that I ever received, and that was, it was so darn cold, and we didn't have mufflers or anything like that. So with this heavy work and we were lifting railroad ties and putting new railroad tracks down and all that. Of course, there was a lot of guys on it, but still heavy work, and you were breathing heavy. And I frostbitten my bronchial, and in here through the upper part of my lungs and bronchial. And so I started bleeding frothy blood from my mouth and nose. And I knew I hadn't been shot or injured, indication of a broken rib or, it pierced your lung or something like that. I knew I hadn't been injured. So that's the only thing that I ever figured that had happened to me. So they pulled me off, and one of the guards went back to the rear. There was a field hospital, and I stood around in there. And being in a warm room, it must have helped because I stopped bleeding. But this one surgeon came out, German surgeon, and he had almost like a butcher's apron on, covered with blood from one place to another, and they talk back and forth German, and I understood this much: no arbeiten, which means no more work. Arbeiten is work. So I understood that. So they took me back to the main camp, and I didn't work anymore after that. So I feel as though the higher echelon, at least, unless they had been what do you call those?
The guy in the black coats?
Yeah. Anyhow, the bad Germans, if you will. SS troops, yeah. They probably would say, well, send him back to work. But then it wasn't long after that, they started evacuating all of the big camps because they were closing in on them by not only the U.S. and British and Aussies and Canadians from one side, but from the east, the Russians were closing in on them. And so I think that they knew, and their supply of resources was getting worse and worse. And they had been, the Battle of the Bulge took place, and so I think the Germans knew that things were on the downhill slide for them. And so they were, I'm going to say, pretty decent, you might say, other than a couple of occasions that I've told you that where they, maybe I'd sassed them back or something. I may have observed it. But, yeah.
So when were you liberated?
I was liberated while we were on a march out of one of the, I was in 2 big international camps. One was 2A and one was 11B. 11B was the first one I was in. They were called international stalags, were all different troop forces, Aussies, Australians, and Canadians, and French, and all of them, except for the Russians. Any Russians were in a separate compound. And then they moved me to another camp further down the road, trying to avoid Russians called 2A, and that was also an international camp. Probably as many as 10,000 in those camps, big camps. They were bunked off just like, pretty much you might say, just like they are in a U.S. camp, you know. 15, 20 guys, and with bunks 3 high. And then they realized that Russia and allies were getting so close that they took us out of these big camps and were on the road, hoping that if they would still win, they would have us as slave labor. And that's one of the statements that has been made by the Germans to the Air Force prisoner of war, that they did more damage than the infantry that I was in. Air Force did so much damage with all their bombing and whatnot that they were going to be held, and they were going to rebuild Germany if they won, you see. And I was in a little town by the name of Fallingbostel, Germany. It's just a little hamlet, you might say, even smaller than Snohomish. And I was liberated on April the 13th, which was a Friday, the day after Roosevelt passed away. He died on April the 12th, and I was liberated on Friday the 13th. And then from that time on, I spent several weeks in a hospital, what they call just a field hospital in France, and they wouldn't let you go home, boy, even with a cavity in your tooth.
Now, when you say liberated, did the Germans just disappear all of a sudden, or did the Americans show up? And
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question, because one of my favorites was Hogan's Heroes, that movie. And the reason I say it, because we had a big old Dutch-German guard, and I never knew his name, or I don't remember it anyhow, but the one in Hogan's Heroes is called Schultz. And this guy was just, I reflect back in time, this guy would open up the big old barn doors, and we were sleeping in a barn on the day that we were liberated, and he'd open up the doors and say, "Guten Morgen," and it's like, "Good morning to you," you know. And when we walked out, there was all of the rifles from the other guards that had disappeared, and the officers that were in our particular march were all gone. Just Schultz, if I may call him Schultz, there. And they just stood around, and it was Patton's troops, his tank corps, that liberated us. They were coming, they could hear, and even the night before, or 2 nights, we could see flashing in the skylight, and tremendous armadas of planes going over that were attacking many of the big towns, industrial towns, in Berlin and Mainz and all of those. But it was Friday the 13th that.
so what was the first thing you saw? Did you see the tanks come down the road, or
No,
American
American troops walking along, side by side of the tanks, and then of course there had been civilians pulled into, I don't know if they were friends or family or whatever of the. It's funny the way they have there. You don't see the house. All you see is a great big barn doors out at the street level. And you might see the backside of the house, just a building wall. And then when you open up the little house door to step through that great big door, you come into a courtyard. And of course, in this courtyard was, right off of that was the barn. And then this is right in town. And so here we were all alone on one of the just this one guard, and the rest of the family never came out of the house. And so us guys figured we were hungry and we were going to pillage that big wagon. And they had boxes of sugar, and I remember taking spoonfuls of sugar out of that. It was corrugated, just like great big granules, not like we use for coffee, you know, but great big crystals. I was eating that by the spoonful. The first thing that would happen when we were liberated, naturally, is we wanted to get something to eat right away. And we didn't have a chance then to get anything. But as soon as we moved to the rear towards this field hospital, the Red Cross was there. And, oh, man, did they ever learn from that experience. I've seen one guy that had a German bayonet. You know, we're talking about a bayonet about that long, and it was a souvenir, and he had it stacked with donuts. And it killed him.
Oh, eat too much.
Yeah, it just blew up his stomach. He just was so hungry. And then when they put us in the hospital, the interns in the hospital would bring, "Are you hungry? Oh, yeah. Well, here, this will do you some good." And they'd give us a great big malted milk or milkshake, trying to put fat on our bones, you see. The worst thing they could do, and I think they have learned now from Vietnam and Korea and Desert Storm and all those places that have had prisoners since then, not to take and treat prisoners of war that way. It's not good. You got to build it up a little bit at a time, because the guy's stomach shrinks, and your system can't handle it. And then you put all this rich, heavy food in there, you know. So, as far as I think our military and medical learned real quick from that. Or if they didn't learn it real quick, they've learned since then not to do any prisoner of war. Try to rebuild your health so quick. Because I had gone from 192 down to 136 pounds. I'd lost about 60 pounds, you see. And so, you're pretty thin. And of course, I can't speak for Japanese, but we have our little evergreen chapter of ex-POWs, and we have several Japanese prisoners of war in our little club. And they had it far worse, not only because cultural-wise, but vicious, and it just didn't. They have learned, or they think they have learned since that we're the ones that started the whole war in Hawaii and Japan and all the islands out there and everything else. But
all right, and so you walked out the hospital doors,
mm-hmm.
and this was in France, you said?
Yes. Uh-huh.
And so where'd you go?
They shipped me from there on an old cruise liner thing, a small one, and the place where the swimming pool had been, they made that into bunks. It was all housed, it wasn't out in the open like now. It was an inside, where they put a dome over it or something. And so that we had I think it was about 120 or something like that, all ex-prisoner of war. And the rest of the staff, just enough to run the ship, were, our friends, you might say, or I don't know how to word it. But almost everybody on board was, except for just running that ship, were all POWs. And they were pretty careful on feeding us then. But going over, when we first went, it was a big liner, and boy, there was a lot of men on board. And the only thing that I could keep down, I bought cartons of Babe Ruth bars. Now, if you stop and think about it, chocolate and peanuts is one of the worst things to digest there is. Chocolate especially. And that's all I could keep down. Everybody was sick on board. And it was just like this, there's a few waves. But coming back, we went the big northern route. And it was so rough that we were towing buoy lines with a light on the end of it behind us. And there was 3 ships in a row, And one morning we woke up and our buoy line had been cut off right behind our ship. But I ate like a son of a gun all the way back. Just never had any trouble keeping it down. And it was kind of funny when the day that I got captured, actually the day that I got released, I mean, they put us all in the back of big troop cargo trucks, you know, and moved us back to the hospital. And when they got out, the first thing they were going to do was run us through the delousing machines. Everybody was full of lice and fleas and everything from the prison camps. And so I was so sick, I just hunkered down against the backboard of the truck. And it was dark, pitch dark, you know. And so then they put us back on. When they got out to go into the hospital, they noticed that I didn't have different clothes on. And so they said, well, did you go through delousing? I said, no. So they shaved my head. Boy, I mean, they shaved it. So when I got on board ship to come home, they were interviewing everybody, and they said, well, do we have any barbers on board? And I says, you know, I just didn't open up my mouth. I said, well, nobody held up their hand. And I says, well, I barbered while I was in the prison camp, so they gave me a whole set of barbering equipment and a stateroom. So I cut, and everybody, we upped the price on the candy bars coming home, or any refreshment type of thing, you know, 5 cents. So everybody had donated 5 cents extra for a candy bar, and I donated 10 cents because I was charging 50 cents for a haircut. And it was so rough, I had to brace myself against the wall in the stateroom, and it's a wonder I didn't cut any hair from that motion of the ship. But anyhow, the guy assigned me, he says, well, I said, I cut hair when I was in the prison camp. Okay, you got the job. So.
And so when you got back to America and came back to your parents, what was that like? Like, kind of describe that experience for me.
Well, the first thing they did after we had our physical, you know, and everybody determined, I was the last one to go through what they call an R&R, rest and
Recuperation.
Yeah, recuperation, and it was 3 months. Which normally everybody else just got maybe a couple of weeks or a month maybe, and so I laid around home. Then finally they sent me down to the Biltmore Hotel in California. And oh man, that was a dream place. And and I had just started to date the gal I later married, and we'd gone to school together. And so they told me that all I had to do was supply the ring and the bride. They'd pay for everything. Well, we had just started to go together a little bit, so we weren't to that point of thinking about marriage. But I stayed down there, and I went deep sea fishing, and I just had a ball. And then I came home and spent the rest of the time laying around the house until I like to drove my mother and dad crazy. And she said, well, isn't that Nordquist girl home? And she was home from college, and so that's where it started.
All right. And just to kind of wrap up here, kind of to do with Veterans Day.
Uh-huh.
What kind of message do you want to get out to kind of the high school age kids about your experiences and, you know, how you were a veteran and, you know, what you're proud of?
Well, I am proud of the fact that I was a veteran. And to give you an example, when I went into the service, my brother was 3 years younger than I told him to quit high school and join the Navy. Because I said, so you didn't have to wallow around in the mud like I did. And he did. Lloyd went and he was in the Navy on a carrier, with a small carrier. But I think the best way that I can explain to you fellas about my feelings on the issue is I've become very involved in representing 6 high schools for junior ROTC. And also many of the, I belong to Disabled American Vets, I belong to VFW, I belong to one of the Masonic groups is called Sojourners, and this particular tag that you're looking right here, I had been called or written a letter or something on having membership in the Battle of the Bulge. Well, I had been captured just before the Battle of the Bulge happened. Battle of the Bulge happened, I think, around the 13th of December. And I'd been captured on Halloween, you see, 31st of October. And so I had held membership for a couple of years in what they called members of the Battle of the Bulge, until they finally did some further research and they found out that I was not eligible. So that's why I've hung that up there. But in regards to your question about, I feel I'm not only qualified but very proud to extend, and I never fail. I'm supposed to go in November to I think it's 11th of November or something like that, up to the Monroe Prison, the Correction Center, and speak before all of those and show them and tell them some of my experiences. I do have one or two things I'd like to show you if you want it on the camera. You can shut it down till I. But anyhow, then again, I'm supposed to go down to towards Seattle and speak a group down there on Veterans Day, and I've been to honored twice now. Once at Fort Vancouver, and given a special ribbon and medallion, and that was something I was going to dig out and show you guys, but I don't know what I've done with it. And then another time at Fort McCord Air Force Base. That was the last one. It was just a month ago that they invited all ex-prisoner of war down there to honor them. So I feel that I'm following in the footsteps of I don't know, showing my honor that everybody's been doing me. This is the national costume that I'm wearing here. It's maroon jacket and hat, and then the gray slacks. But this is if you were just wearing open tie and maybe going to our meeting or something like that, you know, our ex-prisoner of war meeting.